Judaism is certainly a two-pronged system of ethics and morality. There are 613 commandments. Where does that number come from? It's mentioned in the Talmud. And most scholars agree that it is not a round number, because who rounds off a number with 613, or would say 600, 650, 620 even, so that they really counted and they found that there were 613 distinct commandments. Of those 613, the Talmud itself says we are to divide them into two categories. In the Hebrew, the word for one is mitzvahs aseh, literally means commandments to do, and mitzvahs, or mitzvos in plural, los aseh, the commandments do not do. So sometimes, to find the right English words for, some people use the terms positive commandments and negative commandments. More accurately, we would refer to one as prescriptive commandments and proscriptive commandments. The things that we're commanded to do and the things that we're enjoined against doing. We're told not to do certain things. So there are a total of 248. I'll use the word positive and negative because that's the common usage. 248 positive commandments and 365 negative. The Talmud also says, as I mentioned in an earlier class, that the 248 positive commandments correspond to the 248 parts of our body, and the 365, the Talmud says, corresponds to the days of the solar year. And the reason why it's compared to the solar year, even the metaphors in the Talmud are instructive. The Maharal, the great Kabbalist of the 16th century, says in his commentary that it's a way of saying just as the sun could be counted upon, it doesn't violate its command. God put the sun in the sky to do its job. Yeah, every now and then we have some storms in the sun and things like that, but the sun basically does what it was told to do. The same way, it doesn't violate its charge, the same way we're not to violate any of the commandments. Likewise, the 10 commandments, the so-called 10 commandments that are divided into two tablets, the second tablet is entirely do not commit murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, and so on and so forth. The first tablet is said to be more in the positive side. I am the Lord your God. Don't have any other gods, and don't bear God's name in vain. Even though those are negative, they're considered to be extensions of the statement, I am the Lord your God. And then after that, you have to observe the Sabbath and honor your parents. So the first tablet is said to be mostly positive, the second tablet mostly negative. So we have these divisions into two parts. And of course, when a Jew confronts the obligations that he or she has as a Jew, we're a lot more comfortable with the things that we're told to do, because the mitzvahs that we're told to do have very often very beautiful symbolic meaning. They have spiritual meaning. They enrich our lives. We feel more comfortable accepting the responsibility to do the positive commandments. And when it comes to the negative, that's where we have trouble. That's where people start saying, why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? Why are we being so suffocated and told we can't do anything? That's a natural reaction to being told that you can't do something. I don't know about children, but I think it would be fair to say that a little child bristles more at what he's told or she's told not to do than what he or she is told to do. Although some kids are equal opportunity offenders in both areas. So I don't know if that's a good analogy, but I think it's human nature to resist being told you can't do this. So let's try to understand what is the value of these negative commandments. So of course, we're all going to admit that there are certain negative commandments that we're certainly better off abiding by, and that is don't commit murder, don't steal, don't kidnap, and so on and so forth. Those are obvious things that we know that a civilized society can't live without them. But Judaism, most of the 365, or a great percentage of it at least, is directed towards things that we find quite innocuous. You can't eat this food, you can't wear this type of a garment, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't work on the Sabbath. These are things that are restrictive, that some people feel very uncomfortable with. So we're going to try to understand the value of the negative, so-called negative commandments, and try to relate to it in a very different way. First of all, the negative commandments, when we observe them, they are intended to remove the impediments that we have to being more godly and spiritual. When people want to be at a higher level, they want to grow, they want to become more sophisticated, even culturally speaking. When a person wants to develop a more sensitive understanding and appreciation for aesthetics, for music, for intellectual pursuits, and they're completely immersed in a very material existence, they are more or less dragged down, and they can't appreciate the full extent of their pursuits. Certainly when it comes to something godly, if we want to experience godly energy when we do a mitzvah, when we observe the Sabbath, or when we do anything, we have to make sure that there are no impediments. So by observing the negatives, by not doing certain things, that removes certain things that hold us down, keep us from being able to lift off. It's like a rocket ship that everything is working. They forgot to disconnect whatever it is that's holding it on the ground, and the rocket ship does not take off, or does not take off the way it should. When you look at the Ten Commandments, when God initially said them, the Midrash tells us that the Jewish people responded. They were asked to respond. And when God said, do this, they responded. When God said, don't do this, they also responded. And there's a dispute between two rabbis, surprise, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, as to what the response was. Rabbi Yishmael says the response was very simple. When God said, remember the Sabbath, or honor your parents, a positive, they said, yes, hein, in Hebrew, het means yes indeed. When God said, don't commit murder, what did they respond? No. No meaning, we will not commit murder. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says that when they heard the positive commandments, they said yes, and when they heard the negative commandments, they also said yes. Yes, we will abide by that law. Now, which opinion is right? They're both right. In Judaism, that's the other thing very beautiful about Judaism. You can have diametrically opposite views, and they're both right. There are two ways of looking at a negative commandment. One is that it's the idea behind it is we should be revolted at the thought. When someone tells you murder, you should get sick inside of you and say, no, my whole system just rejects it, repudiates it. I cannot tolerate the notion. It's so abhorrent to me. That's one approach. That when you hear a positive, it should resonate within you. Yes, I love it. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. When you hear something negative, you say, no, it's horrible. It's disgusting. It's repugnant, repulsive. It's something I cannot deal with. That's Rabbi Shmuel's view. He says that's the ideal way of approaching the positive and the negative, respectively. Rabbi Akiva says, no. No matter what it is, positive or negative, this is your way of connecting to God. Does it make a difference if you connect to Him by doing the positive, by remembering the Sabbath, or by doing the negative, not doing the work on the Sabbath? It makes no difference. Does it make a difference to you, to God, and to us, if we connect to God by doing what He says He wants us to do, or by not doing what He says He doesn't want us to do? It's like if a parent tells the child to do something, and the child is a loving child and really respects and honors the parent, the child will be excited to do it. If the parent says to the child, don't do something, the same child will also feel the excitement. He's not going to he's not going to think about the repugnance of the act that he's told not to do. He's going to think about his love for his parents. So there are two ways of looking at it. There's a story, it's a beautiful story, it's a long story, I'll make it as short as I can. There were two brothers who were publishers of Jewish publishers in Russia, the Tsarist regime 250 years ago. The names were Shapiro and they were arrested on some trumped-up charges that they published something that was anti the Tsar. Whenever it was obviously not legitimate charges, and they were in prison, but they had a lot of money, and they bribed the prison officials to let them bring their books into the prison. So what they did in prison, they were sitting and davening, praying, reciting Psalms, studying the Talmud, and they were really enjoying their life in prison. They had a vacation. Until the jailer, who was an apostate Jew, a Jew who converted to Christianity and hated Jews, realized that they were not really suffering, so he removed all the books. But that didn't deter them, because they were great scholars. They knew the book of Psalms by heart. They knew the prayers by heart. They knew much of the Talmud inside, outside. So they were able to continue their discussions, and they were enjoying themselves in this vacation, in that dungeon. Well, the jailer saw, I can't tolerate this. I cannot tolerate such a... they're being punished and they're not suffering. So what he did was, he knew Jewish law. He took the big, huge barrel that was used in the prison for all the waste materials, and he brought it into their cell. Now, besides the stench that was horrible, what bothered them the most was, according to Jewish law, you're not allowed to pray in such an environment. You're not allowed to study Torah because it's holy. You're not allowed to recite Psalms. You can't even think words of Torah in that environment. So now they were really down. They were dejected for about 5 seconds. And then they started dancing. And later on they explained, they realized, they said, why were we happy before? Because we were doing God's will. The same God that told us to do it is the same God that says, don't do it, don't study Torah, don't pray. So why are we any worse off now than we were before? And they realized, it dawned on them that you can't take Judaism away from the Jew. You can be put in Siberia, they can withhold certain things from you, you can't do certain things, but you can also still observe the negatives. You don't have to kill anyone in Siberia. You don't have to steal from anyone in Siberia. Those are ways of connecting to God, even when you have nothing at your disposal, no means. That's how some should look at the negatives. These are not restrictions. These are opportunities, ways of getting close to God, ingenious ways of getting close to God. When you talk about the Shabbos in particular, although it's true about everything, but the Shabbos in particular is a very interesting fact that we read about. In the 10 Commandments, the 4th commandment is Zachor es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Remember the Sabbath. In Deuteronomy, where the 10 Commandments are repeated by Moses, it says Shamor, guard the Sabbath. It uses a different term. So that our sages in the Talmud, and the Midrash and Talmud say that, in fact, God said both simultaneously. Of course, we cannot say two things at the same time, but God could do that. But why would he choose to do that? So the way it's understood is that to really remember the Sabbath, which means to get into the spirit, to appreciate the spiritual value of the Sabbath. And if a person appreciates the spiritual value, there is no greater joy and delight in one's life. People who were the most miserable, wretched people 6 days of the week felt like kings and queens on Shabbos. That was the most exhilarating day. And that's probably what kept them alive. But if you want to appreciate the Zachor, to remember, you want to get into the spirit of the Shabbos, it's intertwined with the Shamar, with guarding and protecting its spirit by not doing the things that are forbidden to be done on the Shabbos. These are two sides of the same coin. That's why God had to say it simultaneously, not to show a trick, because people can't hear two sounds at once. And what was the point? The point was to indicate to us, to emphasize that the two go together hand in hand. Another thing about the negative commandments, that we don't really take them too seriously. We say, well, if you commit a crime, you're an evil person, you're a bad person. However, you're going to find that person depending on what kind of crime, the seriousness of the crime. But what happens if you didn't kill a person? You feel like killing someone, you're ready to strangle them, and you don't do it. You're going to give them a medal for that? No, you're not going to give them a medal. I went past the bank today, and I did not rob the bank. I deserve the medal, the Congressional Medal of Honor, because I did not rob the bank. We don't really give anyone any kudos for not committing crimes, but Judaism does. Judaism says that when you're tempted to do something wrong and you resist it, it's as if you did a mitzvah. It's no less, and maybe in some respects even more. The story is told of a certain follower of the Alter Rebbe. He was the first Chabad Rebbe, who was known for his very high spiritual consciousness. And this follower used to come around, and then he would drift away, and he would engage in immoral behavior. And then he would feel remorseful for it, and he would come back to be part of the Rebbe's followers. And the Rebbe was extremely loving and showed him tremendous amount of love and respect. So the first time it happened, the other Hasidim said, well, he's trying to get him to change his ways, he's mend his ways, so he's going out of his way to display love and warmth. You can get people with honey more than you can with, how does the saying go, with vinegar. So he was using honey as a means to get him back. But it kept on repeating itself. After a few days of shaping up, he would go back to his errant ways. And then he would come back, and the Rebbe would show him the same love. I don't know how many times it happened, so many times that it bothered the Hasidim. He said, look, he's obviously not getting him to change. This person is incorrigible. So why is the Rebbe showing him so much love? And they complained to the Rebbe. Personally, they came to him and said, why are you showing him so much love? It's as if you think this guy is a great guy. You're not getting anywhere. And he said, you can't imagine the delight that God experiences when a person commits one fewer sin, one sin less. If you committed 1,000,000 sins and 1,000,001 sin, you resist, that generates tremendous godly delight. You should never underestimate the power of someone who restrains himself or herself from doing something wrong, even though they failed all the other times. In Judaism, we don't have a thing that, well, you're judged. Yes, God judges us. That's for God in the next world. But God looks at every mitzvah we do. In fact, He judges us even by the things that we resist and we do not do. He gives us full credit for it. Well, text number 3, famous saying from Ethics of the Fathers, who is strong? Same author asks, who is wise, one who learns from everybody? Who is rich? Someone who's happy, content with his lot. Who is honored? Someone who honors others. Beautiful, very lofty, beautiful ethical sayings. And this one is equally important. Who is strong? Not the person who just won a wrestling match. Not the person who just conquered a city. Not the person who is able to prevail in any sport. Who is strong? One who overpowers his inclinations. And he quotes Proverbs, King Solomon, better one who is slow to anger than one with might, one who rules his spirit than the captor of a city. The person who shows restraint, which nobody in the world knows. No one knows that I was ready to strangle someone and I didn't do it. No one knows that. It's an inner struggle. But that inner struggle that you succeed in prevailing over the negative impulse is superior to any other act of strength. So when we look at negative, so-called negative commandments, that's why I don't like the term negative, because they're highly positive. When we observe them, they are highly positive. Of course, you're not going to get credit for not committing a crime that you were not really interested in committing. We're not going to get credit for things that we don't have a temptation. But when you have an urge, when you have a temptation, when you have pressure, and you resist it, that has at least equal power to doing a positive mitzvah, and maybe even more. Now, when we talk about the relative value of positive versus negative, there are many contradictions in Jewish writings. But when you see contradictions, very often they're not really contradictions. What they're doing is they're focusing on different angles, different aspects. If someone, in camps, in Jewish camps, they have, for color war, they usually take two Jewish themes, and each team takes one of the themes. One takes the Torah, one takes the Mitzvot, the commandments, the study of Torah versus the commandments. And each team has to show that its ideal is greater than the other. And of course, they're both right, because in some respects, Torah study is the greatest ideal. In some respects, observance of the mitzvahs is the greatest ideal. Well, we can have color war today, and we'll have one team that takes the positive commandments, and the other team takes the negative commandments. And we'll have a nice, we don't have time for this, actually, but I'm just saying that would be a nice thing where each side presents the value, the preeminent value of one of those areas of human experience. But in the Talmud itself, there seems to be a contradiction. In one place, it says that a positive commandment, in some cases, doesn't work in every case, overrides a negative. The example given, the classic example given, we're not allowed to wear shatnez. Shatnez is a garment that has a mixture of wool and linen. Only those two. That's why when we buy a suit or a coat, we take it to a shatnez laboratory. There's one in Toronto, in New York, and many large cities that have it, or else we send it away. And they put the fibers in some parts of the garment under a microscope, and they will determine if the woolen garment has some strands of linen in it. If it does, some cases you can take it out and replace whatever has to be replaced. In other cases, you have to give it back to the store and say, I can't buy it. It's not kosher. So garments also have to be kosher. Now what happens, we also have a mitzvah in the Torah that we put tzitzis on a four-cornered garment. The tzitzis are usually made out of wool. What happens if you have a linen garment and you have to put on tzitzis and all you have is the wool and tzitzis? So you have a conflict over here. You have a mitzvah of wearing the tzitzis, putting the fringes on the garment, and you have a commandment not to wear wool and linen. The positive overrides the negative. You put the tzitzis on there, fulfilling the mitzvah, it overrides the negative. Again, it doesn't work in every mitzvah. You can't rob a bank to give tzedakah. It's a positive mitzvah to give tzedakah, it's a negative to rob the bank, but you're not allowed to do that. It doesn't work for that. It works for certain things, and I'm not going to go into the dynamics of it because it's thousands and thousands of pages have been written on that subject, literally thousands of pages. So that statement suggests that the positive is stronger than the negative. Yet, when the Talmud talks about atonement for violation of these commandments, it says if you violated a positive, you didn't do a mitzvah, you ask God for forgiveness, you repent, and God forgives you on the spot. If you violated a negative and you ask for forgiveness, the atonement is tentative. It waits till Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, your slate is clean. So according to that, the negative is more serious. A violation of the negative is seen to be more serious than the violation of the positive. So which is it? So one way of reconciling it in the classic Hasidic work called the Tanya is as follows. When a person performs a positive commandment, they generate spiritual energy within their body. That's why it says the 248 are likened to the limbs of our body, the organs of our body. We bring spirituality, we bring godly energy into our body. If you didn't do the mitzvah, then you didn't generate it. You blew it. You missed that opportunity. When you violate a negative commandment, you create a hole. You create a defect in your soul that cannot just be repaired by just saying, I'm sorry. It requires the energy of Yom Kippur to correct and mend that defect, which it does. Now, a positive commandment, even after you repent for it, you will never be able to recapture the lost energy that you missed by not doing the commandment. So in other words, the reason why it's easier to atone for the positive is not because it's inferior, but because what you miss with the positive, you can never get back. What you atone for is simply that you didn't follow God's will. You offended God, so you say, I'm sorry. That's what two people do. When one offends the other and they want to make amends, they just say, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. So when we violated a positive, we say to God, I'm sorry, we'll try better the next time, and that's it. But what about what we missed? We didn't generate that energy. Too bad. You can't do it. You can't help it. You can't correct that because you missed it. Well, I could do the mitzvah later on. Yeah, but you could have done the mitzvah twice, and you only did it once. So you really missed the opportunity. The negative commandment, there's no missed opportunity. It's just the defect that you cause that you have to repair, and that takes a little bit more time. Repentance is not enough. You need Yom Kippur as well. Well, according to that, it turns out that there's an aspect of the positive that is more serious than the negative, and there's an aspect of the negative that is more serious than the positive. So it doesn't really tell you which is more important. Nachmanides, one of the great medieval rabbis of the 13th century, says that the reason why the positive pushes away the negative is because the positive is an expression of love. When you love someone, you do something for them. You show them how much you love them. When you respect someone, you don't violate their interest. You don't harm them. You don't take advantage of them. So positive commandments are essentially an expression of love for God. Negative commandments are essentially expressions of fear or reverence, respect for God. Which is more important? Which is a higher level? Love or respect? And Nachmanides, well, he can never be wrong over here. But Nachmanides says the principle that the positive pushes away the negative is an expression of love, and love overshadows fear. He's talking at a very basic level. Love, I love someone versus I fear the person. I fear someone, that's why I don't do anything to offend them. Well, of course, love is a much higher emotion than fear. But in a relationship, you need both. You cannot have a relationship based on love alone. If a person tries to make the marriage work based on love, but there's no respect, the marriage, the relationship will not endure. You need both. So without going into which is more important, the truth of the matter is it depends what kind of love, and it depends what kind of respect. There are levels of each. So if you take the lowest level of love and the highest level of respect, you would say the respect would override the love. Now, we spoke last 2 weeks about the 20 dimensions of a mitzvah. So I made a list over here. We can go through the 20 and see whether the positive is a better expression of one of those 20 or the negative. And if you want to, I was not sure about some of these things. Even though I only put a question mark in one, I wasn't 100% sure about some of them. But I'll try to crystallize my understanding of this as we go along. The first aspect of a mitzvah is that it's a commandment. It's God's will. Why do you do it? Because God said so. Where is there more an expression of obedience, of surrender to a higher authority, than which is a greater expression of that? When you do a positive thing or when you don't do a negative? I think when you don't do a negative, that's a real expression of obedience. When you're told you want to do something and you're told not to do it and you don't do it. Because when you do something for someone, it's an expression of your feeling for that person. You want to get closer to that person. It's not always a sign of obedience. So when it comes to obedience, doing things because it's a commandment, the negative is usually a stronger expression of that. I say usually because some people don't want to do positive things and they only do it because they're commanded to do it. So it could be in both. But I think the negative would probably have more of that. Emulating God, there's more, obviously, in the positive. God does not, God wants us to emulate the things that He does for us, the kindness, the love that He shows us. reciprocation. When we do things, God reciprocates. The positive is superior. The bond that we create through a mitzvah, I think, is equal. I can't figure out as to whether one would be more than the other. Because if we say that a mitzvah is our way of connecting to God, by virtue of God telling us to do something, and we do it, that creates a connection between an infinite God and a finite human being, simply because God commanded us. Does it make a difference what the commandment is? No. I would think that no matter what the commandment is, the fact that you were commanded and you abided by it means that you have made this connection between yourself and God. In that sense, they're both equal. In terms of discipline, negative is superior. You're more capable of disciplining yourself. You are more disciplined when you resist doing the things that you want to do. When a child wants to do something and you tell the child, no, you can't do it, you're disciplining that child. Sure, when you tell them to do something, you're also disciplining, but the negative seems to be stronger. Refining the person, since the person's refinement means you're taking away the rough edges, you're removing the impediments, you're removing the impurities, the negative is really focused on that. The negative is there to prevent you from having the negative things so that the positive, natural positive tendencies of a human being should be able to express themselves. Now, you often hear this debate between people, are we essentially good and then the evil is superimposed on us, or are we essentially evil people and the good is superimposed on us? Very often you find people at different ends of the political spectrum arguing about that. Judaism believes that the good is more innate to the person than the evil. That if we take the person and we're able to get to the core of a human being, that core will be positive. Problem is you can't always get to the core because it's covered up with so many negative things. It looks like the person is essentially a negative being. That's what it looks like because there's so much cover to that treasure that for all intents and purposes, this person is a horrible person. How could you ever change that person? The negative removes those layers of dirt that prevent the good from coming out into the open, and that's what refining is. And the same thing with liberating. The soul is covered up by this crust, and it feels imprisoned. Removing the crust through the negative, by observing the negative, allows the soul to be liberated, even more than through the positive. But when you're talking about nurturing the soul, feeding the soul, the positive is more valuable than the negative. Realizing the potential, interestingly, at first I thought, well, realizing the potential, you need the positive to do that. No, it works the other way around. Because how do you realize your potential when there's resistance? Realizing our potential, when the soul is in paradise, it can't realize its potential because it has no resistance. It's resistance that creates the ability for a person to dig more deeply into their essence and to reveal untapped potential that they could not have revealed just by doing positive things alone. In terms of unity, you would think, unity requires doing. And here's where I would probably put a question mark, because on one hand, when I do one mitzvah, I eat matzah on Passover, and everyone else eats matzah on Passover. Around the world, that creates a certain sense of unity. We're all doing the same thing, and we've been doing this for thousands of years. So in that sense, there's a certain sense and awareness of unity with the positive more than the negative. But when you think about it, the positive is different for every person. Every person comes to observing a mitzvah with a different approach, with a different sense of love. Someone eats the matzah because they enjoy eating matzah. Some people eat matzah all year round because they love it. Some people hate matzah, but they eat the matzah because it's a mitzvah to eat the matzah. Some people love the matzah because it reminds them of things. Everyone comes to a positive mitzvah with a different feeling, which is great, which is wonderful. One of the beauties of Judaism is that we all do the same thing, but we're all doing something different at the same time. You know, when you come into a shul, synagogue, and you go from one place to another, it seems that they're saying the same prayers. But if you went There's a section in Brooklyn called Borough Park. It has about 500 synagogues only. There are 200,000 Jews, only 500 synagogues. And you can go to 100 of them and you'll have a different experience. And you look at the prayer book, they're using the same prayer book. They're saying the same prayers. But some of them do it with different gestures. Some of them will be singing. Some of them will be jumping. Some of them will be gesticulating. Some of them will be silent and silent meditation. Some of them will be talking while everyone is davening. I'm kidding about that. Everybody will be doing the same thing in different ways. That's the beauty of Judaism, that it has the standards that remain unchanged because they are anchored in divine revelation. We don't change anything, but yet we bring our own subjective creativity to everything that we do, so that every mitzvah we do has both a divine element that never changes, and it has a human element that is always changing and always being different. It's a dynamic thing. That's what's positive. So the positive mitzvah of one Jew is not necessarily the same as the positive mitzvah of another Jew. But we all do the negatives the same. The negatives doesn't require action. It's inaction. It's passivity. You can't distinguish between how I didn't kill someone and how you didn't kill someone. We both didn't kill anyone, thank God. The person is alive and well. Nothing has affected the person. If we're talking about what we do, then there is differences. The real unity, in a certain sense, so I would put both, I would say they're both equal, because in some respect, one is greater in unity than the other. Now, generating energy, this is going to be a surprise one, because I mentioned before that when you do a positive mitzvah, you generate energy into your body, into your soul. When you do a negative, you're not generating anything because you didn't do anything. In Kabbalah, we're told that that's not 100% accurate. It's not inaccurate, but it doesn't tell you the whole story. In fact, the power that you elicit by not violating a negative when you're tempted to do so is much higher than by doing a positive. It's so high, it's so spiritual, it's so lofty that it cannot be accessed. You can't feel the generating energy. You cannot experience it, at least not in the current day and age. Whereas the light and the energy generated by the positive commandments have a much greater visible impact on us. But where is the energy greater? It's greater in the negative. And if we have time, I'll go back to it to explain it a little more. In terms of protection, when we do a positive, we bring about not just the generation of energy, but we also have the insulation that allows us to absorb the energy without any destructive effects, because spiritual energy is very powerful. Like putting your finger in a socket could kill you. But energy is good. Yes, when it's channeled through the wires and it's well insulated and you connect it to an appliance, you'll have a lot of benefit. But if you try to put your finger in the socket thinking, well, the energy is good when it goes through the electric lights, why can't I put my finger and get the direct benefit? Yeah, the direct benefit will be death or serious injury. The same thing with a mitzvah. A mitzvah generates powerful energy, but powerful energy can hurt you. That's why the mitzvah is designed by the divine designer as not only the way to generate the energy, but also a way of insulating that energy so you're able to absorb it and get the most benefit from it. You don't need that for the negative commandment. The negative commandment does not need insulation because that energy that you generate doesn't really touch you and doesn't affect you directly. It's an indirect effect. In terms of the manufacturer's rules and regulations, the manufacturer of the world tells us this is how the world works. By doing the mitzvahs, well, let's take the analogy that I used last week. You buy this computer, and there are instructions how to make it work, but also there are instructions what you should not do to it. Don't kick it. Don't throw it down on the ground. No matter what happens, don't do that. Now, which is more important? They're both important. You have to do both. One without the other will not work. So then in that sense, they're both equal. In terms of an ID, a spiritual ID, the positive mitzvahs are much more of an ID than a negative. The negatives don't show anything. In terms of finding meaning in life, yes, it's true. People find much more meaning in studying Torah than in not studying Torah, because it's not the right place to study Torah. And to use that story, it took the ingenuity of those two brothers to figure out that there's meaning in not learning Torah when God says not to learn Torah. But the average person finds more meaning in doing something rather than not doing something. Most people don't get satisfaction and fulfillment when they do something, not so much when they just resisted doing something bad. Helping the world, the positive is superior, because you're generating positive energy that pulses through the entire world, and it affects everyone directly. The reward, the positive, has a greater reward because you're generating more spiritual energy, and the reward will be greater in the next world. Preparing for the future, again, the positive is superior because you're making the world a dwelling place for God, which is what the last point is, liberating the sparks. The negative, however, is superior because of an interesting understanding of the system of sparks. Let me go back to the concept. Everything in this world contains sparks of holiness, contained within the physical objects of this world. How do we have, our job is to liberate those sparks, to unleash them. How do we do it? Take a piece of food, we eat the food, we recite a blessing, thanking God for it. The food is kosher food. We eat it with the intention that this food is going to give us energy so we'll be able to live our lives and do good things and fulfill mitzvahs. So that food has now become a vehicle for you to become a better person, a better Jew. So you liberate the sparks. But what about a piece of pork? How do you liberate those sparks in pork? To eat it? No, you can't. The way you liberate the sparks in pork is by not eating it when you want to eat it. By resisting the temptation, that's how you liberate the sparks in forbidden things. But the sparks in forbidden things are more powerful than the sparks in permissible things, because the principle in Kabbalah is the higher it is, the lower it falls. These sparks fell from a high place, and where do they end up? In the physical objects of this world. The more physical something is, the more coarse and crass and even evil, the more powerful the sparks. And this is one of the big mistakes that many people who were misled by Kabbalah, who didn't have a proper understanding, fell into this trap. You heard of the Shabtai Tzvi movement and other Frankist movement. They believed that you should commit the most immoral acts as a way of liberating the most potent sparks. In their mind, in their perverted way of thinking, since the Kabbalists say that the highest energies fall to the lowest place, then we should engage in all sorts of illegal activities because we're going to liberate these holy sparks. Their mistake was that, yes, the holiest sparks are on the lowliest aspects of existence, but the way to liberate them is by not doing them, by resisting the temptation. That's how you liberate those sparks. But they are more potent than the sparks and things that you use that are positive. And that's why, in that sense, the liberating of the sparks, the negative is superior. And in terms of making a dwelling place for God, obviously the positive is superior because you're building a palace. Yes, you have to get rid of the negative influences in that palace, but the palace has to be built, and that is through positive commandments. As I mentioned before, that the reason why it's said especially in Kabbalah, that the negative commandments generate a higher light is because certain things you could generate through your actions. My actions have an effect. That means when I do certain things, they access certain spiritual energies. There are certain spiritual energies that are beyond being accessed. Action can't do it. They require just being an empty space, being open so that you do not become an obstacle to that generation of that very lofty spiritual energy. So in that sense, observing the negative commandments has an advantage over the positive, because in the positive, there's always an element of my ego involved. I'm always projecting myself in my actions. No matter how hard we try to be selfless, we're always, as human beings, incapable of denying our own identities when we do something positive. A negative commandment, we're not doing anything. There is no action. There's no projection of my personality. All there is resisting and breaking my urges and my desires. So I am receptive to something that is beyond being accessed by my limited physical actions, even though they're divine actions because they're mitzvahs, but there's also an aspect of it that doesn't allow for me to be totally receptive to that which is transcendent and higher. This is a subject that deserves much more time than we have right now, but it's interesting that the negative commandments, we have 365 that corresponds to the days of the solar year. Why is it compared to the solar year? Jews are into the moon much more than they're into the sun. Well, there's nothing with the moon that relates to 365, but that's not an excuse to emphasize the sun, because in the Talmud, whenever it talks about a mitzvah, it always refers to a mitzvah as a candle, ner, a light, a candle. Each mitzvah is another candle. It brings light. But the negative are like sunlight. Their light is much more powerful. That's the advantage of the negative. And another thing that the Zohar says, that the 365 negative commandments correspond to the 365 blood vessels in the human body. What is the significance of blood? The human body is made up of many different limbs and organs, and one is not like the other. But the blood vessels transfer the blood equally to all parts of the body. The blood is the same in one part of the body, essentially, as it is in any other part of the body. You don't have a different blood type in your heart as compared to your legs. It's the same blood type. It's the same blood. When you deal with positive commandments, there's where you have the various differences between people. Every person has their specialties. When you deal with the negative, that equalizes us. We're all on one level. And that is what causes us to have this great unity. So in conclusion, do negative commandments have value in Judaism? Absolutely. And it just takes a certain amount of appreciation to realize how meaningful those negative commandments are. And if we go back to the Shabbos, if a person would just experiment, just one Shabbos, it says in the Talmud that if we would observe 2 consecutive Sabbaths, we would have the redemption. And in Hasidic literature it says, no, you don't even need 2. 1 is enough. You need 2 dimensions of the Sabbath. If you appreciated both dimensions of the Sabbath, we would be liberated. When we say the Kiddush Friday night, what do we say? What is the Sabbath? It's Zecher Litzias Mitzrayim. It's a remembrance of the creation of the world, because God created the world in 6 days and he rested on the 7th. But it's also a remembrance of the Exodus. Why is it a remembrance of the Exodus? Passover is a remembrance of the Exodus. But why is the Sabbath a remembrance? Because, among many reasons, it's the same thing. It's liberation. You're liberated. If everyone would just experiment, one Shabbos, you don't use technology. You can have the lights burning from before Shabbos. You can put them on a timer if you want to save electricity. You cook all your food before Shabbos. If you want your food to be hot, you leave it on a crock pot or on a warmer or on the fire with a covering, a blech it's called. You don't drive. You don't write. You don't use any of your electrical. You don't use your iPhones, your iPads, your computers. You're not using any of the electricity. You're benefiting from it whenever it was there before. And just spend the day free from all the constraints of technology. And say the prayers and eat 3 good meals and do the things that we do on Shabbos. I guarantee you that will be the most liberating experience that you ever had in your life. Now, if it isn't, if you feel horrible because I can't do anything, the phone is ringing and I can't answer it, then do it again. By the 10th time, if it doesn't work, you get your money back. But people who observe Shabbos don't notice that there are restrictions. You see, that's the key point over here. If you're into if you don't appreciate the liberating aspect of it, it's a restriction. It's on the contrary, it's imprisonment. I can't drive to the beach. I can't go shopping. I can't do this. Can't visit my friends. It's very restrictive. But if you get into and appreciate the liberating aspect of it, you'll feel that this is the most exhilarating day of the week. And the miracle is that you don't have to wait, to the end of the year to go on vacation for 2 weeks, which usually means that you need a vacation when you come back from the vacation. Most people need a vacation from a vacation. But here you have every week, this is the most exhilarating thing, to such an extent that even a non-religious Jewish writer once said that more than the Jews keeping the Shabbos kept the Jews. And there are many ways of understanding what he meant by that, but there's a simple way of understanding it. You can only cope with the life. Life has so many burdens, it's so debilitating, all the problems, only because we have Shabbos one day a week. It's not just that we don't go to work. Rabbis work on Shabbos. That's the main, from many rabbis, that's the main day that they do their work. So there's nothing wrong with doing things on Shabbos through which you earn your living. That is not against the Shabbos. A babysitter who babysits on Shabbos, the only thing that there is a law that you cannot be paid specifically for Shabbos. I can't say in my paycheck, you're getting paid for your Shabbos sermon. The paycheck has to cover everything. So if you babysit on Shabbos, you have to also babysit in the middle of the week and you get paid a blanket sum. That's a rabbinical restriction. Biblically, even that's not forbidden. Work is not forbidden on Shabbos. What's forbidden, what I mean by work through which you earn your living, what's forbidden is the things that you do that show that you are the master of creation. You are the one in charge of the world. And the Shabbos, you say to God, God, I'm giving it back to you. You're in charge. I'm sitting back, and I'm going to enjoy being part of the world that you created. 6 days of the week, we are God's partners. God says, I want you to be my partner in creation. Don't sit back and do nothing. Think God does everything. You do it. Shabbos, we hand it back to God, and we say, we are now on the receiving end. We're able to sit back and enjoy and savor and really get into the spirit of Shabbos and the enjoyment that comes from it.